Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Numbers were in the news this week, including COVID cases and the latest census count. The former remains as number one for creating news, including events affected by the virus and the dangers of playing politics with policies. We will examine these stories, as well as Louisiana senators split on the infrastructure bill, and another city inspector pleads guilty to bribery. All of this is subject to discussion by tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. LeBron Joseph, news anchor, WGNO TV, Channel 26. There you go, LeBron. Stephanie Grace, political columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And now, David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL TV, Channel 4. We're going to go over to LeBron first thing because COVID, of course, is in the news, the Delta variant, giving us a hard time, and the governor announcing latest numbers today.
Yeah, the governor announced the latest numbers today. What's interesting is he announced the numbers. Today's number's not good, over 7,000 new cases of COVID. But this has been a record-breaking week, and 7,000 today, over 5,000 Thursday, Wednesday, Tuesday, over 6,000, and then a whopping 16,000 cases reported over the weekend, which I think shook everybody. What's interesting about the governor speaking this afternoon is he didn't really announce any additional closures or restrictions or anything like that. I think a couple of things have happened. One, we've got the vaccine, and that is the biggest thing that the governor is encouraging folks to do, as well as Dr. Cantor, the mayor, and anyone, political elected official, anyone that'll listen. That's what they're sort of reinforcing. Please take the shot. Our vaccination rates, and that's the silver lining, is that they have increased. They haven't increased to the point where they need to be just yet. We don't have, that 75, 80% of the people vaccinated in the state. However, those numbers are growing, and as the Delta variant has taken over, people appear to be listening and being convinced that it is a good thing to go ahead and get the vaccination, primarily because most of the hospitalizations, up to 91% of people hospitalized are people that have not been vaccinated. And speaking of those hospitalization numbers, that also record at this point today, 2,907 people in the hospital. That's a huge, huge deal. CNN reported this afternoon that there are 8 states that account for 50% of the hospitalizations. And you better believe that it's all of the Gulf states, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. I think Arkansas is in there, and the other state is Nevada. Half of the hospitalizations across the country, and we're in that number, and it's not a number we need to be in.
No, it really isn't a number to be in. And also, I believe 88% of the deaths that have been recorded are among those unvaccinated. And among those vaccinated, the median age is around 74. So those who are, at the other higher risk areas, as was always heard, underlying condition, age, weight, et cetera, you need to be concerned about that. But the bottom line, as you said, anybody who listened, they're saying, please get vaccinated. We're also seeing more testing going on and new test sites opening up, too.
Yes, new test sites opening up, more testing going on. They've done their best to sort of make the vaccine available anywhere. I did a story earlier this week in Tangipahoa Parish where, in fact, they had some of the lower vaccination rates in the state and some of the highest percent positivity. Earlier in the week it was 19.7 or something. I think it's gone on to 17 now. But you're absolutely correct. More testing going on. The state is doing its best to also solicit help. We've got help going to 3 of our hospitals. Our Lady of the Lake in Baton Rouge Children's Hospital is getting federal help here as well. And that there is the North Oaks, I think it's North Oaks over in Hammond, is also getting federal help. Got some folks in to be able to buoy them while they're going through this tough time.
And LeBron, with the new guidelines, like what's happening in Orleans Parish next week, the guidelines that people have to start showing their cards when they go to restaurants. The more and more people have to start showing their cards when they go someplace. I think the people who aren't vaccinated, I think that's going to start making an impression on them and start saying, maybe we should get cords now? I mean, maybe it's time to do this. And so that could be a driving force.
I think you're absolutely right, Errol. I think it's going to be one of those things. I mean, the other part of that is you could still exist without getting the vaccine, but that means that you're going to have to be tested much more frequently if you intend to do these things. You're going to have a test within 72 hours before going to the Superdome to see the Saints game. You're going to have a test if you and the wife decided to go out and get some dinner. Everything is going to require a test if you're not vaccinated, and I tend to believe that, if not initially, over time it would wear me down, certainly, to get into action and to do something. Let me go ahead and get the shot.
And then, of course, there's masking also, emphasizing masking. And, of course, kids 12 and under can't be vaccinated right now, so they really need to be protected.
That's exactly right. David, you were going to say?
Oh, yeah. One of the things that's a silver lining potentially is that we have this LA Wallet app that automatically populates with your vaccine information when you were vaccinated, and it's can't be counterfeited. So that could be a really easy way to get through lines at the Superdome when you're trying to get in, or other places, to make it easier if people take advantage of it.
Right.
I think the Saints even suggested using LA Wallet, or at least downloading it, so that for Saints games it would be a whole lot easier. I carry my card in my wallet. I haven't had to use it much, but I'm sure it'll frazzle.
We were hearing so many people were going to the LA Wallet app this morning that a lot of people were having some trouble. So we'll work that through, but I'm sure it's in very heavy demand.
Yeah, very convenient.
All right, guys. Still talking about COVID, unfortunately. Thanks a lot, LeBron, and the other two, you, Steph and David, too, for your comments. Steph, let's stick with you.
Sure.
You wrote a piece and you invoked the former governor Bobby Jindal's name.
Yes. Well, it's hard not to when I look at this situation. Of course, this whole COVID situation has been so politicized for so long. It's politicized again now that we have the Delta variant. We're really an outlier in the states that are hard hit, the ones that LeBron mentioned, where we're having the really bad numbers. Because our governor is an outlier. He's a Democrat, for one, and he is someone who's embraced public health guidance on trying to bring the numbers down, even if it means restrictions, which again is not easy for him politically in a red state, but he's done it. He's done it pretty consistently. Some of these other governors, not so much. What I wrote about was the trend. Ron DeSantis in Florida, Greg Abbott in Florida. I also could have mentioned Tate Reeves in Mississippi. Where they're not doing the things that the CDC is recommending under these really dire circumstances, imposing mask mandates, allowing localities to impose mask mandates, supporting school systems that want to impose mask mandates. In fact, they're kind of cracking down on those things and issuing executive orders to ban localities from taking the measures they want to take in some cases. In Florida, Ron DeSantis went so far as to basically say he's going to withhold money from people who enforce mask mandates. He's backed off on that now. But, when I look at this, and both of these people are possible presidential campaigns next time around in the Republican Party. And it really made me think of Bobby Jindal and his second term and how he spent so much time kind of auditioning almost for Republican primary voters and not doing the things that most governors do, which is what makes them kind of attractive presidential candidates historically, that they kind of lead. They're not caught up in the partisan wars that people are caught up in Washington so much. They have to do things. They have to try to bring the numbers down in their state and keep hospitals working and keep schools open, things like that. And I thought, Jindal was possibly a cautionary tale for some of these other governors who are so focused on how it'll play among the kind of primary voters who are the most conservative voters in the Republican Party out there in other states and not taking care of business at home. And of course, we know that Bobby Jindal started off immensely popular. He ended up immensely unpopular, in part because he embraced some of these austerity policies that really left the state in tough shape.
Of course, we have to note that there are those who really do oppose these mask mandates. I mean, take a look at the protesters outside of St. Tammany Parish School Board offices.
Right, and boy, heart goes out to the teachers who have to enforce them under those circumstances. I mean, you have to think that there are a lot of people who don't love it, so they're not going to be out protesting it or out, holding a rally in support of masking, but they understand why it's happening.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. David, let's move on over to you because you reported on a city inspector pleading guilty to a bribery charge.
Yeah, and you and I were talking before the show about how important this is. This isn't just, somebody, tried to skip a step or whatever. This is an issue now where we could be affecting the safety of building projects all across the city. This was Brian Meadis. He was a mechanical inspector for the city of New Orleans, and he's just the latest person to plead guilty in a sweeping federal criminal investigation of the Safety and Permits Office. He, says that he admits that he took bribes. Basically, he was part of a conspiracy with another inspector who, his name was James Mohammed, who was the head of the code enforcement office in the city of Kenner, it just so happens. But he was actually doing inspections in the city of New Orleans as a third-party inspector. There's a huge number of inspections done for municipalities in our area by third-party companies, mostly by this company called IECI, which also employed Mr. Meadis and James Mohammed and a couple of other people who've already been implicated for falsifying inspections. And in this case, I was able to use a database that I've collected of these inspections and permits and found some of the cases where Meadis for the city would allow Mohammed to actually work as a HVAC contractor installing, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems in houses, but using other contractors' names. And Mohammed was paying Meadis like $300 per job to allow that to happen. Then he was paying $500 a job to somebody else, another contractor, to use his name and license because he's not licensed. And then he would essentially collect the money for the work. And then in some cases, he would even inspect it on the back end, approve the job, and say, yeah, we're good to go on his own work, on his own contractor's work. So this is a scheme that we've seen repeated now, and it's coming out in multiple reports. And if you think about it, it's this particular person, Meadis, who pleaded guilty, has nothing to do with the Hard Rock Hotel, but that's the most kind of egregious example of where if the inspectors are not showing up, they're not checking the work, then something catastrophic can happen if they're not doing the job and they're just letting contractors pass off this work as if it's been approved.
And this was a second inspector to plead guilty.
Right. There was one back in 2019, Kevin Richardson. He pleaded guilty after he was indicted for taking bribes and actually paying bribes so that falsified inspections that he didn't actually do would go through the process, be approved, and the work would get done. And he was saying that he was taking bribes from contractors and he was paying bribes to other people in the office to pass this stuff off. And again, this is an issue of safety. Katie Moore and I at Channel 4 have done a series called Hidden Dangers, because dangerous things like if you're installing a gas line and you don't do a real inspection and the gas pressure isn't right, you could have an explosion.
So how deep does this go? I mean, you're talking about different contractors. Are contractors being looked at? Are we looking at indictments for contractors?
Yes, it goes deeper in the Office of Safety and Permits with inspectors, and it goes to several contractors. There are 2 contractors not named by name in the indictment, in the guilty plea by Brian Meadis, who were participating apparently in this scheme. They were offering their licenses so that then Mohammed could get the work even though he didn't have a license, and they were allowing him and Meadis to use their license and taking payments allegedly from Mohammed of $500 per job.
Does the city still allow third-party inspectors?
They do.
It's still allowed.
And they still allow IECI to do some of that work, and they've been implicated. Their owner, Randy Farrell, has been implicated in a federal indictment in a separate case.
So what is the safety? It's safety and permits, right? That's where the inspectors come from in the city of New Orleans. What is that department like these days?
It's depleted. A lot of the people who were doing those jobs of checking and inspecting buildings and home construction jobs have left. Some of them were implicated. Some of them, like Julie Tweeter, who was the one of the inspectors who didn't show up at the Hard Rock Hotel for key inspections before it collapsed in October 2019. Eric Treadaway, Thomas Dwyer, they all resigned or retired under suspension because of allegedly falsified inspections. So it's a depleted department. They're trying to reconstitute it. Last year, the CAO, Gilbert Montano, told me that he was going to revamp the whole department. He tells me he's still having trouble getting those jobs filled. And so that doesn't bode well either for trying to, uproot these problems.
All righty, David, thanks a lot. Let's go on over to E right now. And with the COVID surge, we're seeing events cancel.
Yeah, and over the weekend when the announcement was made about the Jazz Fest not happening in October, they're going to push it back to April again. I think a lot of people thought, well, this is the beginning of everything being canceled. And the next day, Stephen Perry, who's the CEO of what's called New Orleans and Company, which we used to call the Tourist Commission, issued a statement. And something that's very important in his first paragraph, he expressed regret about the Jazz Fest's decision, but he pointed out this was not a decision of the mayor or of City Hall. And I think that did a lot to maybe explain things to people, because a lot of people may have thought this is the beginning of City Hall going on a rampage and closing everything down. And so it still left the possibility of there still being other events. Now, I've got to tell you, this afternoon as I was preparing for the show, I was prepared to say, well, the French Quarter Festival is still happening. Well, that's not happening anymore. No. That today it announced that it's pushing back to April. And in a sense, the Jazz Fest, I realize now, deciding not to hold this event is almost like City Hall saying not to do it, because that's the big bear in the woods. I think a lot of people are influenced. I think a lot of other festival organizers don't want to be in a position that someone is found having gotten COVID at their event, and yet the Jazz Fest didn't have an event. And so I suspect we'll see more of this. Maybe not all of them. Festival Acadian and Lafayette canceled this week. On the other hand, there's a thing called the Sugarcane Festival in New Liberia. And they sent a statement out saying, not yet. We're going to wait and see, and if we can have it, we will. But I think the groundswell is obvious what's going to happen. The other question, though, is what does this mean about Mardi Gras down the road? Arthur Hardy, who publishes the Mardi Gras Guide, was quick to make a statement. I agree with him that this does not necessarily mean that we're not going to have carnival activity, because carnival is still far enough away. A lot of the crews, when they got the word that they weren't going to parade, had already been building their parade. So it's not like they're waiting around to see whether or not to start designing crews. A lot of the floats are already in the float dens, and so I think there's time. And so if all of these shutdowns that are being experienced now, if they result in, by the end of the year not having this problem, then there's every reason to believe that I think we'll still have a full-fledged Mardi Gras celebration.
It's so disappointing. We were looking at such a busy October. We were talking about that not too terribly long ago. About so much happening in October.
April had become the new October. Now October has become the new April. And we go round and round.
Yeah, I know. But of course, public health comes first. All right.
At least in October, we still have the Saints.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks a lot. LeBron, yeah, hopefully is right. And a happy Saints season, too. Happy with the Saints. Okay, LeBron, over to you. Census numbers.
Yeah, census numbers. And in a sense, we kind of reflect some of what happened in the rest of the country, that we're becoming a more diverse America. Our cities are getting a little bit bigger. Our rural areas are losing population. And Louisiana's population grew about 2%. 2.7%, a little over 100,000 people. However, we didn't grow enough in order to get another congressional seat. But there are certainly population shifts in different areas of the state. New Orleans grew, which is great. I think grew by about 6 or 8%. However, that's not anywhere near where we were pre-Katrina. But the surrounding areas, Jefferson Parish, nice explosion, continuing to grow there. Kenner, St. Tammany Parish, St. Charles Parish, places like that.
St. Bernard Parish, too, is
St. Bernard Parish growing. but like New Orleans, not the pre-Katrina numbers, but still St. Bernard continuing to grow, which is a beautiful thing to see. And folks, especially if this is people that are finally getting back home, if you will, if that was home for you. Some of the interesting trends: African American population in New Orleans actually shrunk a bit, but African Americans remain the larger population in New Orleans proper. The Hispanic population continues to grow. That is a growth we've seen since prior to Katrina, quite frankly, but much healthier after the storm. Influx of folks that came here to do a whole lot of work, and we have one of the most vibrant Hispanic communities in the South, certainly. I think allotting for, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember the figure here, about 11% of the regional population, which is huge, which is actually pretty good. So those are what the numbers look like. The good news is we didn't lose population statewide, because there are states, I'm thinking California and New York, that actually lost seats. But there are states that actually gained seats in Washington. If I'm not mistaken, it's Florida and Texas. Texas gaining two seats, the only state getting 2 seats.
But you know, an issue that some of the suburban areas may face in the future, I mean, if people are thinking about a huge explosion in the Jefferson Parish, they got to realize Jefferson Parish is running out of land. And a lot of suburban areas too. I mean, a lot of the first wave suburban parishes that were quickly populated, that they're full now, unless they start, building vertically or something. And you can probably see more vertical growth in the city, where you have a lot more old buildings that can be converted into condos and that sort of thing. That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it is going to be a challenge with areas that are hot, if you will, and zip codes that are hot, and folks like being there. I think it's really encouraging to sort of see where the regional growth is, and as the state is, I mentioned about the rural areas, most of the growth in the state is south. Most of the growth is New Orleans or Baton Rouge and further south, the northern Louisiana parishes, even up to Shreveport and all. Bossier have reduced in a bit of population.
In explaining Louisiana politics or economy or anything, I-10 is a useful tool, because a lot of it is south of I-10 and north of I-10.
That's exactly right.
And you can really learn a lot by looking at it in terms of that way.
And you're exactly right. Where it becomes important, and Stephanie certainly knows this, is the reinforcement that's coming up.
They're looking at, I mean, you mentioned North Louisiana losing population. There's always a tremendous push to keep 2 congressional districts based in North Louisiana, one in Shreveport, one in Monroe. It's going to be really tough. Even though we don't lose a member of Congress, because of the shifts in population, there's going to be a lot of pressure to move one of those districts kind of to the south. So expect a really big political fight over that.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting with the census numbers, as you mentioned, diversity too, greater diversity, and then also there were more categories on the census forms. There has been, for about 20 years.
A key word is going to be exurbia, and that refers to the next layer beyond the suburbs, and that's where a lot of those people are going to be moving, to exurbia.
To exurbia, got it.
All right. Thanks a lot, LeBron. Steph, over to you again. Let's wrap it up our conversation. And there was an infrastructure bill that passed the Senate.
Passed the Senate with surprisingly bipartisan, given the current mood in Washington. Every Democrat plus 19 Republicans, and that's an important number because you needed 10 Republicans to make it not filibuster proof, basically. Well beyond that. So it's moving, and one of the reasons that one of the people behind the fact that it's moving is our own Bill Cassidy, who's really emerged since re-election as someone who has become more of a centrist, almost in the Mary Landrieu mode, which is kind of ironic because, of course, he beat Mary Landrieu back in 2014. But remember, she was always in the mix, in those, they call them gangs, Gang of 8, Gang of 10, however many people, Democrats and Republicans trying to come up with a bipartisan bill. He's really moved into that role of late. And, the biggest bill, of course, is this $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. It's a huge number. There's a separate bill that's 3 times as big that the Democrats only support. They call that soft infrastructure. That's a lot of social programs and things like that. This is hard infrastructure, roads, bridges, storm defenses, renewable energy, broadband, things like that.
Yeah.
I found it really interesting that Cassidy, after he won re-election to a new 6-year term, has really solidified his bipartisan
He has, and it kind of started when he voted for impeachment, of course, and acknowledged the election results. And of course, he doesn't have to face voters for another 6 years. So the ones that are mad at him, he's making a bet that they will get over it.
Because he ousted Landrieu by attacking her as being Obama's person.
And that was so interesting because remember the phrase, it was Landrieu Obama 97%. That was his kind of mantra. But I remember asking him at the time, one of the things Landrieu was really known for was these kind of state-specific efforts to bring funding home to Louisiana. I said, doesn't Louisiana need that? And he said, I'm going to do that too. And I think you have to say that he is doing that too.
So the vote for the infrastructure bill, our other senator
voted against it and went on Fox News and called it stupid stuff. So that's the division. That's of course John Kennedy. That's another wing of the party that really is kind of dug in against anything that might you could say reflect well on Joe Biden. You could say reflect, give them an accomplishment. You could say cost so much money that it could contribute to inflation. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the House with Louisiana's delegation because, they don't need Republican votes if they get almost every Democratic vote, but we have a majority of Republicans representing House districts. There's big stuff in every one of those House districts. So, does Clay Higgins vote against a new bridge over the Calcasieu River that, is in danger of crumbling? Does Steve Scalise vote against widening I-12 up on the North Shore? Does Julia Letlow, who campaigned on rural broadband in the 5th District, that rural district, vote against a bill that has a lot of it
in there? So when will we see these votes? Real quick, Steph.
There's a whole other thing going on in the House, not imminently.
Okay. All righty. Thanks a lot, Stephanie.
The fastest way of saying it.
All right. Time for other stories. E, over to you.
Well, the NFL expanded its season from 16 to 17 regular season games. To do that, as an act of mercy, they took away one of the preseason games. So there's only 3 preseason games now, but the first one is this weekend. The Saints play Baltimore in Baltimore.
All right, go Saints. David.
Well, with schools back in person, I resumed my school bus investigation series, Taken for a Ride, and found that we're back to the same problem with buses not being certified. And now there's a school bus driver shortage nationwide, and that's causing some of the buses to not show up to pick up kids in the morning.
Yep, that's a problem. All right, David, thanks. Over to you, LeBron.
Charles Action Jackson was a local cultural champion, Mardi Gras Indian, brass bands, all of that stuff, WWOZ host, and out of the Lower Ninth Ward. And he passed away this week of colon cancer. But the Ninth Ward's been showing up every night for him, and there have been a ton of celebrations. His services will be next week.
All right. Thanks a lot, LeBron. Steph, to you.
2 weeks from today, the first anniversary of Hurricane Laura, a devastating hurricane that went through the western part of our state, Lake Charles area. First of many disasters in the last year that have struck there, including another hurricane, freezes,
flooding,
coronavirus, flooding. They're still waiting on a congressional appropriation, and they really could use it.
They definitely could.
Yeah.
Been a rough time for Lake Charles. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you all for joining us, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.